Hey everyone, it's Jason here, and have I got a review for you? So, as we can see, we have here ourselves some most gorgeously beautiful orchids. These were from B&M, and I mean, don't they just look amazing? I think they look astonishing actually. I mean, you should probably see from the thumbnail just how amazing they look up close. But speaking about that, it really isn't until you actually first see these, and it wasn't until I first saw these when they were bought for me just a few days ago, that it really finally struck to me what is meant by a female's flower. I never quite got the phrase until I saw this shape. And my god, if you've ever seen one yourself, and if you're not so quite virginous yourself, then you should know that this is the spin image. And I thought, well, why is this? Is this just some biological coincidence, or is there actually a reason for why this would look this way? And I was trying to think, well, is there a reason why that is? And I got to thinking, and I got to thinking some more, and then it hit me. I just remembered once what my grandmother once said. She said that when it comes to nature, that there's nothing by chance. And so it made me conclude, and yes, this has indeed evolved this particular look for a specific reason. And that is what I've tried to hypothesize on. And so my theory here is that this looks like the sort of place you would place a certain thing in order to fertilize it. And so let's say, for example, if it's in nature and we're in like a forest or a place where these might grow, and you have something like a fox. Now, this fox thinks that it is fertilizing a vixen, and so it's trying to stick its penile piece into the flower. And when it does that, it then wanders off into another flower, and it tries to do the same thing. Well, by doing so, it has spread the pollen of this. Now, orchids that produce pollinia like these, right, will have a pollinator, such as normally like an insect. But in my case, I think it could be something like with a penile piece, like a fox. And that will touch what's known as this psyllium, which is here. And that will stick to the abdomen or the head of this insect. Well, in this case, it will be the penile gland, or what's often called the gland. And this piece here is pulled then away as the that which is trying to fornicate the flower retracts its self. It will then try to enter another flower to try more fertilization, after which it's poured out the pollinium out from its anthemum. Sorry. And it is then connected to the psyllium by what's known as the caudicle, as it's producing it into another flower. And this then will actually come in contact with what's known here just below there as the rostellum. Now, this rostellum is important because it ensures a separation between what's known as the androgynous meseum, that's the male component, and the female gynoecium. And the reason why that's important is because you do not want this reproducing asexually. You want, sexual reproduction. And so it has to do it. But that said, that's my little theory. I think that's probably how this has evolved, and the two have actually worked in some sort of symbiotic relationship whereby they've been able to reproduce the other. But I would say that if the foxes were only just trying to mate with the flowers, they would actually select themselves out of the evolutionary line, because in doing so, they wouldn't reproduce themselves. So I have to assume then that the foxes that have managed to sustain themselves in the population are still actually reproducing through their own means. Now, I want to talk about these flowers because, as I say, they are very pretty. They are absolutely gorgeous, and I want to also say that there are 28,000 species in the world, and something like about 700 in genera is how it's distributed amongst the world over. And that's just an incredible thing, because you look at these, you think, well, how intricate, and then to think that there are that many more different sort of variations of these flowers is something of a marvel of nature. And I just love the colour, I really do. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that my favourite colour is blue, and perhaps if I had some blue ones, that wouldn't be a bad thing. I think I may go back to B&M, and I may actually get myself some blue ones, but that's just it. That's part of the video today that I'm talking about, is that if you go to B&M, you can buy these, and these aren't even that expensive, they're only $3.99. And I would also note here, you have this transparent container, and you may actually notice that you can see the roots, and that's because these are very special types of plants. They cannot actually just have their roots fertilized without them being exposed to the sun directly. And the photosynthesis isn't what takes place solely on the leaves, actually. The roots themselves will photosynthesize, And you may notice that there's quite a green colour to these roots. That's because they're filled with chlorophyll, which is the pigment that actually also gives the colour, you know, for green plants. Normally with the roots, they're a bit more yellow. Well, not even yellow, but maybe just beige or very plain pale in colour. These ones have a nice colour to them, and I've been watering them quite a lot. You want to make sure that you fill your little bowl, put it in a dish like what the one I've got here, make sure you can see it, and just fill it in with a little bit of water. You don't want to drown the roots. As I say, the roots do need more space to fertilise. You don't want the effects of reflection tearing away from the sun. You don't want that water absorbing that precious sunlight that photosynthesis requires in order to reproduce that ATP energy. Now, these leaves are very big as well, which is also pretty nice, and they also have a nice overarching look to them, which I also quite find dandy. And what's also nice about these is that these orchids they also have the decency to place in their own stick to ensure that these orchids aren't going to just snap or collapse. It's to give the stem support. And as you can see, it's a very long stem. This is actually probably about half a metre. And yes, I do, as a scientist, use the metric system. I'm not going to use imperial units, sorry. You'll have to look them up yourselves. And yes, so yes, half a metre. And as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 flowers have already bloomed, and still another 2 have to go. Now, when I first got this, neither this one nor that one had showed their face yet. I'm so glad that now there they are, and I look forward to these ones popping up. But when you've got that amount of weight at the top, you definitely do need one of these little sticks to ensure that it can hold itself. And now, I'm touching the stem itself, and it does feel quite firm. Now, you may be wondering, well, what if it becomes pot bound? How would you deal with it then? Well, all you'll do is get yourself an even bigger pot, and it's crucial that you ensure that that pot is transparent, or at the very least translucent, but ideally transparent. And then you just get some fertilised, nutritious, nitrogen-rich soil. You place that into the pot, and then you'd put this inside along with it. I must apologise for that, the camera cut out. So as I was saying, yes, you would want to make sure that you have a good sized pot. Now, when it becomes pot bound is when the roots are actually starting to really poke out from the top. That means that they've outgrown their pot. Now, this may start to become pot bound. Normally, when you buy them from shops, they're trying to conserve a lot of space because they want to get in as many flowers as they can, and as many of these plants as they can, because they want to try and stock up so that they can sell them. So you're never really going to have the ideal pot. But as I say, $3.99, that is so unbelievably cheap. You want to get down to the MM, you want to get yourself some flowers. I'm going to go again, I'm going to buy some more. And the reason to buying another one is because you can actually experience yourself, say as a possessor of these orchids, and try pollinating themselves. Now, I'm going to have a go at pollinating these, and obviously I won't be using my genitalia like my theory would otherwise suggest. I'm going to use what's known as a pencil. This is pencil. And all you do, right, is you take the eraser side of the pencil and you just sort of plot it in, well, I don't want to necessarily do this now because it won't be fair for the plant because I don't have a recipient plant, but as for demonstration purposes, you just poke the pencil into here where you have the residuum. Now, this part I know looks a bit like the clitoris. Also, just so you know, this is called the dorsal sepal. The dorsal sepal, these are the lateral sepals. These are actually what the petals, these parts here are the petals. I don't know if you know that. And this part is the column, and it's composed of some different components. Now this here is the labellum. Now, if you're familiar with the female reproductive system, then you would know that it would be very well parallel to what's known as the labia. You have the labia majora and the labia minora, and this labellum kind of parallels quite clearly with that. So as I say, it really has evolved the trait of mimicking that of a vagina, and as I say, clitoris looking thing here. So anyway, when you want to fertilise it, you stick your pencil with this side. In fact, I'm going to use the pointed part here so I don't actually induce fertilisation, but you'd stick it in there, you'd wiggle it around, pull it out, the anther would detach, and then you would put it, that's the anther that's attached to the caudicle, you'd then pull it out, and with your other plant, make sure it's separate from this, right? You don't get sexual reproduction by sticking it in one of the other ones. You'd only be reproducing asexually. As I say, they can do that, and you can do that, but you're not going to experience the beautiful breadth of variation. You're just going to end up with the same looking plant. Now, whilst that's not necessarily a bad thing, I would say that there's much beauty in actually mixing and matching. when it comes to flowers, and so I would strongly advise that you do get yourself another plant and you try fertilising that. Now let's say, for example, you had a red orchid and a blue orchid. Well, that's how we got purple. By those two reproducing, you get purple. And then if you wanted to get some yellow orchids and reproduce them with blue orchids, you get some beautiful green orchids. And you don't have to end there. You can also use red and yellow for orange. You can get orange orchids. So obviously just go by your primary colours, and then you can use the secondary colours to actually produce even more different variations. And so I think I've spoken upon this topic quite well. As I say, as long as you're making sure that there's just a bit of, maybe about a centimetre's worth of water in there, then you'll be keeping them very well. Do try and keep them exposed to the sun, because as I say, those roots do need that light, and your plants, your beautiful orchids, will come on so wonderfully well. And by the way, if you do that, you can always tweet your pictures or what have you at me, and I'll comment on them as well. Until then, I hope you liked my video, and I'll see you next video. Bye!